Genetics and heredity can sometimes seem like a roll of a dice. When a dog has a litter of puppies, they all look different. Some express different traits from their parents than others do, as if someone rolled a pair of dice to determine the genes of each individual puppy. Or maybe it seems like a hand of cards. Your parents shuffled the deck and dealt you cards at random, and those gave you the color of your eyes, the texture of your hair, the shape of your nose. But in fact, genetics is a little bit more like a game of rock, paper, scissors. You know, rock beats scissors, scissors beats paper, paper beats rock. There's still plenty of variety. On any given move, the opponent may throw out rock, paper, or scissors, but certain moves will always beat other moves. In the case of genetics, these moves come down to dominant traits and recessive traits. If a dominant trait is paired with a recessive trait, the dominant trait will always win. Only if a recessive trait pairs with another recessive trait do you see it show up in an organism. I'm Science Mom.
And I'm Math Dad. Today we're going to learn all about genotype, phenotype, and recessive and dominant traits.
Hello and welcome! I see the Trottier family. Hello to Victor in Belgium, Amy in Florida, Z-Tech watching from West Virginia. Today we are going to explore further the idea of dominant and recessive traits, which is super important to understand if you're going to understand genetics. So last time we said that Mendel's big discovery was that everything inherited two sets of information, one from each parent.
That's right, and that was different than, there were those other theories that were wrong, like the Lamarckism, the different ways that we inherited things, but Mendel figured out that because he used those pea plants.
He did, and he saw a really interesting ratio when he would cross that first generation where he had crossed two different varieties. He would see this 3-to-1 ratio, and that was his clue, and he used math to come up with this idea that everything has two copies. And we have a cool word for that. The word is a diploid. Guess who's diploid, Math Dad?
Am I diploid?
You are.
Yes.
Guess who else is diploid?
Kaladin?
Yes, me and the dog. All human beings, most mammals, are diploid. They have two copies of each set of genetic information. So this is the human chromosomes all lined up pretty and colored pretty from longest to shortest. We have two of each of those 23 chromosomes.
Nice, so that's duplicate information, or are they both the same or not?
No, they're not identical. So chromosome 1, for example, you get one copy of chromosome 1 from one parent and one copy from another. And that's what it means to be diploid, two copies of everything. Now, if you have page 18 of the notes, if you haven't already filled this out, I hope you'll fill it out as we go along, because this is how we explain Mendel's results.
Right, so when crossing two true breeding pea plants with different traits, Mendel found that the F1, or first generation right,
of plants looked identical to the parent plants. The trait from the other parent plant had disappeared. So remember, when he took purple flowers and white flowers and crossed them, all the flowers were purple. The white trait had disappeared.
So somehow purple was stronger than white when it came to that cross, all right?
But when those plants were self-pollinated, they were no longer true breeding. Both of the traits appeared with a consistent ratio. A quarter of the plants had the trait that had disappeared, and 3/4 of the plants had the other or dominant trait.
So we talked about that 3-to-1 ratio for the F2 generation.
Yes. To explain this phenomenon, Mendel said that each plant had inherited two factors, one from each parent. Some factors were dominant and others were recessive. Today, we call these factors genes or alleles.
Cool, so Mendel called them factors, but we're calling them alleles today.
Yes, and he published his research, but it was ignored for more than 30 years. Mendel wasn't recognized as the father of genetics until a long time after he had died. Now, this is such an important concept to understand. So you've got your genetic information, right? But your genetic information doesn't always match what we see. Because with our purple pea plants, the true breeding purple pea plants looked the exact same as the hybrid. But
that's
they
right.
were different. One of them would always produce purple plants, and the other one would produce a mix, a 3-to-1 ratio of purple to white.
Okay, so if the physical traits that we see, you're saying, are not necessarily identical to the genetic information that we have in us.
The genetic is sometimes different. So the genetic information we have, those 2 copies, we call that genotype. And in this example, we use P to represent the allele. Allele is a super important word. That's what goes in that little blank right there. An allele is a variation of a gene. So when we're talking about a gene, here on these little cartoon chromosomes, that spot is always going to be where the gene for flower color is, but you might have the purple allele, the purple version of the gene, or you might have the white allele, the white version of the gene. And you can kind of think of these as each allele as being like a little boss telling the plant what to do. And the purple one is pretty bossy.
The flowers have to be purple. You hear me? Purple flowers forever.
Whereas the white allele is not very bossy.
If no one has any other plans, may I suggest white flowers?
So what do you think will happen if both of these get together? If you have one purple and one white, who's going to be in charge?
All right, so one that's bossy and one that's a pushover. I think the bossy one is probably going to get its way.
Yes, and this is obviously sort of cartoonized and a little silly, but it helps you to understand why it is that our phenotype can be different than the genotype.
Ooh, so what's a phenotype?
Phenotype is the trait we see, the observed trait, or the observed characteristics. So in this example with flower color, if we have 2 purple alleles, if our genotype is capital P, then they're both saying nothing but purple, purple forever.
Yeah, you'll get purple.
That's the trait we're going to have. We write it down right there.
Oh, yep.
So the flowers that are produced are always going to be purple. And shout out to Sasha and Evie and Miss Kenzie. I'm seeing the chat fill up with purple. What about this second one here?
Ooh, so you got 2 white ones. So
2 white alleles.
So we use a lowercase p, so always lowercase for the recessive.
Yep.
All right.
Capital for the dominant, lowercase for the recessive. So the recessive white alleles, one says, what do you think about white? Would that be okay with you? And the other says, oh, white would be lovely. Let's go ahead and do white.
So I think they're going to get their way, and we will get white.
That's right. But if we have one of each, it's the bossy one who wins.
Purple flowers forever!
And the white one is like, oh, okay, I suppose we have to do purple.
Okay, so there were 3 possible genotypes here that I saw. So if we look at those again. We had purple, we had white, and then finally a mix.
Yes, 1 copy of each allele.
But this is why you were talking about paper, rock, scissors in the intro. It's like we're playing that game, except that there's only paper and rock. And paper is always going to beat rock.
Exactly.
Ah.
So in this example with Mendelian inheritance, the purple is always going to win. You only have 2 phenotypes, and if you have 1 copy of each, purple is going to be what you see. And we show that with capital letters. And I want to go through the quick little examples that we have on page 19 of the notes and just practice this. It's really important when you're learning these new terms to practice them, because that's how they'll stick and that's how you'll get to understand them.
So as much as anything, today is a vocabulary lesson. Okay, so this top one. For plant height, I have instructions for dwarf plants. What do you think about that? It's perfect.
So if you have lowercase t, and your choices are that the plants can be tall or they can be dwarf, the lowercase t tells you that dwarf is recessive. So if you have little t, what are you going to get?
Well, in this case, because they both match up, they'll both get their way, and we should get dwarf plants.
That's right. We will get dwarf plants.
Okay. For the next one, the seeds must be smooth, no wrinkles. I was hoping for some wrinkles, but whatever you say. I love your comic science, Mom.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a capital S and a lowercase s. So in that case, it's the dominant together with the recessive.
And the dominant one will win. So what are the seeds going to be?
They're going to be, it looks like capital S must stand for smooth.
Yes.
So we're getting smooth seeds out of that one.
That is exactly right.
Good. Well, seeing it in the chat. Good job. Okay, and then for this bottom one, only yellow seeds. Yes, yellow seeds forever.
So we have capital Y, capital Y. The seeds are definitely going to be yellow.
So both are dominant. So there are lots of different characteristics here. So I see the height of the plants, whether the seeds are round or smooth, what color the seeds are. We've also seen colors of flowers. So there are lots of different traits. And let's see if I remember right. The thing that we are seeing, we're observing, that's the phenotype of the plant. And the actual alleles, the genes, that's our genotype.
That's right. And Mendel was studying each of these traits. So now one more time, but without the little cartoons, just with the letters. If we have a capital T, lowercase t for plant height, is that going to give us tall plants or dwarf plants?
All right, so capital T was for tall plants, and in this case, because we have one of each, the dominant one is going to win. So the phenotype will be tall.
That's exactly right. And if for seed texture, our genotype is capital S, lowercase s, will the seeds be wrinkled or smooth? Okay,
so capital S is going to win once again. And it was smooth. Is that what capital S stood for?
That's right. It was smooth. Right. And shout out to Daniel and Evie and Gregory and everyone else who is putting down correct answers in the chat.
I'm pretty smooth.
All right. Are you smooth enough to get the answer right on this next one? Because this next one's a little tricky.
Ooh, okay.
For seed color, the genotype is little y, little y.
Okay, Y stands for yellow, but wait a minute. I think there's a trap here. Capital Y stood for yellow, and little y meant not yellow, or in this case, green.
Yes.
So they're both saying green in the genotype, so that means that the phenotype
will be green.
Green. Aha! You thought you had me, Science Mom. You didn't.
Good job, Math Dad, and good job, Unbeatable Science Kids. It is important to know one more term for this, and that other term, oh no, our notes froze up.
But there we go. All right.
Phew. The other term is, are the alleles the same or are they different? If they're the same, we say they are homozygous.
Because the word homo is the prefix that means same.
Yes, and if they are different, then the word is heterozygous.
Aha, okay, so when you say the same as each other, you're saying we get the identical one twice. So in this case, capital W and capital W paired together?
Stands for white wool in sheep. Okay. So white is the dominant wool color in sheep, and if you have two dominant alleles, then the color of the sheep is going to be white.
Gotcha. But also it could have been little w, as long as both alleles are the same?
Yep. And if you have little w, then those two recessive alleles are going to give you black. So let's write in those colors for those homozygous traits.
Okay, so the genotype for this sheep was the W. So the phenotype ended up giving white, and the genotype for this other sheep, little w, and it gave us a phenotype of black. Now, this reminds me of something, Science Mom. This reminds me of the cross that Mendel did. He had true breeding plants. Is that what was happening there?
Yeah.
He had capital letters, so homozygous, and that's why they were true breeding. It always gave white. And so also homozygous.
But a different trait.
For the other. And
when the genotype is homozygous, your phenotype will always match the genotype. So when we have the alleles being the same, it's easy to tell what the phenotype is. With heterozygous, though, you need to know which trait is dominant.
Okay, so heterozygous meant that the letters do not match up. One is capital, one is lowercase, so the alleles are for different traits. Oh, sorry, the alleles for the trait are different.
That's right. So for this sheep here, is it capital W, or is it capital W, little w?
Definitely mixed. I see a capital and a little, so I guess you didn't ask for one, but yeah. When we mix the two, then the phenotype will always match the dominant
whatever trait is dominant.
So in this case, white was dominant. So the capital letter won out. Just like in paper, rock, scissors, if you're only going to play with paper and rock's never going to win.
Yep, paper will always win. That's right. So here are Mendel's crosses again. And you can see if you are crossing homozygous traits, the result's always the same. So homozygous purple, And homozygous purple, you're always going to get purple.
So
these are our true breeding pea plants.
Okay, so that's what he did first. He just separated them and said, all right, I know these flowers never give me white.
They're always purple.
And then he had another flower bed, or pea bed, and in that case, they always gave white.
That's right. But if you mix them, so you take your purple flowers that are homozygous, and you cross them with a white flower that's homozygous, what do you get? Heterozygous.
Ooh.
These ones are heterozygous.
Write this down. Homozygous and heterozygous. And we even had a name for that generation, didn't we?
Yes, this was the F1 generation.
Okay, so this was the F1 generation. This was probably the F0 generation.
No, the parent generation. That's what they call it. Yes.
Parents are
I'm not a zero. I'm a parent.
Whatever. 0 comes before 1, science mom. It's a math thing. Okay.
And then when you cross 2 heterozygous plants, you get so much variety with the genotypes, because you could get homozygous for purple, you could get homozygous for white, or you can get heterozygous, which in this case is still purple.
And what he was actually able to observe, though, he can't see those alleles, but he can just see the phenotypes. So the colors, he can see that it was white, and the 3-to-1 was purple to white. But he then figured out, there must be these alleles working behind the scenes.
Yes. And how do we know which trait is dominant? Well, this idea of a dominant trait came about from Mendel. And the reason it came about was because he had purple flowers and white flowers. He carefully cross-pollinated them, and all the flowers were purple. But then white showed up again in the next generation. So he said, the information for white still had to be there, but it was hidden because purple is dominant. And we find out whether a trait is dominant by observing what's going on and by experimentation, doing crosses and seeing what happens.
Well, it's like playing paper, rock, scissors without knowing the rules and just saying, all right, did I win or did I lose? And then you can kind of figure it out by looking at the outcomes.
In this little chart here on page 20, you need to figure out, does the word homozygous go there or the word heterozygous? So we'll fill this in real quick, and this is looking at the same results that Mendel did, the same thing where he would cross 2 plants that had different traits, but this time it was a tall pea plant and a dwarf pea plant.
Okay, so the plants in the parent generation are true breeding, or...
Are they homozygous or heterozygous?
So if they're true breeding and they're never going to result in the opposite one, it's definitely homozygous.
That's right. And good job to everyone who put homozygous down in the chat. You are correct. Okay. But in the F1 generation, that's this little orange box right here, they received 1 allele from one parent, 1 dark green allele for tall, and then they received 1 allele from the dwarf parent, 1 light green allele for short. So are they homozygous or heterozygous? Just go ahead and say it out loud if you're watching the recording, or put it in the chat if you're watching live.
And they've figured it out already. They are indeed heterozygous because they have different alleles for that trait.
That is right. And then last but not least, in our F2 generation, 1/4 of the plants are dwarf. They show that phenotype for dwarfism. These plants are homozygous or heterozygous?
So the dwarf ones?
Yes.
Okay, so the dwarf ones are homozygous.
That's right.
We had to have, repeated copy, but for the tall ones, you got a little bit of both.
So let's uncover that homozygous word right there. So our dwarf plants are homozygous. We can even add another word to make it more clear what we're talking about, and we can say they're homozygous recessive, and that tells us exactly what we have. And then 2 of the 3 tall plants are heterozygous. They have information for each.
Okay, so that's interesting. So correct me if I'm wrong here, but if you were out in the wild, you saw a dwarf plant, you would already know that it had to be homozygous recessive.
You would.
Because that was the only way that this one could come about.
Yes.
But if you happen to see the phenotype of a tall plant, well, in that case, you actually wouldn't know the genotype.
No, you wouldn't. It might be homozygous, it might be heterozygous.
Ah, interesting.
So we're going to do 3 quick examples before we go to our quiz questions, because these are, if this is the first time you've heard the terms homozygous and heterozygous, genotype and phenotype, it can take a little while before they sink in. So here is a real-life example of Mendelian genetics happening. The short legs of a Munchkin cat, that's this cat over on the far side with the short legs, is a dominant trait. So what is the phenotype, if we represent this trait with the letter M, what's the phenotype of capital M, lowercase m? Is it going to be a Munchkin cat like this? Or is it going to be a cat with long, normal length legs?
So,
Put your answer in the chat. What do you think?
Huh. Well, I've got to say, Science Mom, I haven't seen very many Munchkin cats. So it seems to me like that being Munchkin wouldn't be dominant. Interesting.
But it is a dominant trait.
So what did...
I'm seeing Sarah
leg.
says Munchkin, Charles says Munchkin, and that is correct. Let's circle that Munchkin cat. The phenotype of big M, little m is going to be Munchkin. You're going to have a Munchkin cat with short legs because that allele is dominant.
Nice.
Good job, everybody. What about white feathers? White feathers is a recessive trait in pigeons, and so let's represent that by a G for gray and then a little g for white. What's the phenotype of little g, little g? Is the phenotype going to be gray or white?
Okay, so it's homozygous because the 2 alleles match up, and it's homozygous recessive because they're the lowercase letters. So what would the phenotype mean? So what are we actually seeing? And in this case, the chat is going wild here, saying that it's white.
Yes, good job, Caleb and Lisa and Amy. White is correct.
Nice.
Now, before we go to our poll questions, I do want to remind everyone, we talked about blending in the last lesson, and I said that sometimes we do see blending. Sometimes, if you have red plus white, you get pink. One of the traits is not dominant over the other, and you can almost think of this as 2 bossy alleles having an argument. The one says, red and only red, and the other one is just as bossy.
White flowers forever!
So I guess we could compromise?
Pink it is.
There is such thing as incomplete dominance, there is co-dominance, but when we're talking about Mendel and his traits, he was looking at traits that were just simply dominant and recessive, which makes them a little bit easier to study.
Okay, so this idea of co-dominance that's happening here, that's not the Mendelian trait.
Yeah, that's not Mendelian genetics, but it does happen.
Okay, cool, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about those in the coming days.
Now, Math Dad has prepared a What's That Critter challenge for you, and he's very proud of this one and is very sure that nobody's going to get it because he had never heard of this animal before he found it.
I think their overconfidence is about to get them, Science Mom. This critter's children are called joeys.
So what do you think this animal is? If you have a guess, put it in the chat. Our first clue should tell you what continent it's from.
We'll see about that. Oops. Sorry.
And next clue, this critter travels with its children in a pouch.
To keep them safe while they grow old enough to walk and run.
What is it? I'm seeing lots of guesses for kangaroo. It is not a kangaroo. Let's go to the next clue.
Woohoo.
This critter is nocturnal. It sleeps in the day under spiky plants to protect itself. I'm seeing guesses for wallabies and wombats and opossums. So they know it's a marsupial. They're on the right track. Final clue.
All right, well, that is our final clue. It's time to reveal the answer. And...
it's a quokka, which is a marsupial in Australia that is one of the cutest animals I've ever seen. But not a super well-known one. I hadn't heard of it either until Math Dad was searching for animals for the What's the Critter challenge.
It's a quokka. Take that. And now, let's see how you do on the poll questions. Head over to itempool.com/sciencemom/live, and let's do this thing.
So our first question is about the name for different versions of a gene. So say you have a gene such as for flower color, but some versions of the gene give you purple, other versions give you white. What do we call those different versions of a gene?
Are they factors, alleles, homozygous, or heterozygous?
What do you think? And Kaladin, it's time to cheer them on for good luck.
Do their scores actually go up when Kaladin's cheering?
I do. How could you not learn more when you have this cute little face cheering you on?
Yeah. I like your cheers, Kaladin.
He's like, oh, I'm just here for the treats. We do have a clear winner, Math Dad.
We do have a leading category. On the first question, I'd like to give them just a little more time because I know everyone's getting in.
This word is an important word to know when studying genetics, and it's one that I've seen college students sometimes get confused about. So I'm hoping that you caught this one and that you'll remember it and use it.
Okay, revealing our answer. And it is indeed alleles. So the word factors is actually
That's what Mendel used to describe these units of genetic information that were being passed down. He called them factors. We usually call them genes or alleles.
That's right. So
next question. Good job, unbeatable science kids.
An animal or plant that has 2 copies of its genetic information is called, is it haploid, diploid, triploid, or tetraploid?
What is the term for when an animal or a plant or another organism has 2 copies of the genetic information? Nope, he didn't get it.
He was sniffing me out. I don't know if he...
I put a treat right here.
Oh, it was...
Why.
I see. I thought you were coming in for a kiss, Kaladin, but no, it was just the treat.
Got it.
All right. So, okay, they must have been paying attention. My guess is not many people had this vocabulary word in mind before class today. You took a class on Latin and Greek prefixes, right, when you were in college? So
yep, so
you're really good with these science words.
The di, tri, and tetra, hopefully those ring a bell.
Pretty good hint there. All right. Revealing the answer to be...
Diploid is correct. I am diploid, you are diploid, Kaladin is diploid.
We all have two copies of our genes.
And if you ate a banana for breakfast, the banana is triploid.
Ooh, well, that's pretty cool. I honestly, I've got to say, I know what tri and tetra mean. I don't know what the hap is.
Haploid is just one copy.
Just one copy, but...
We'll be talking more about that in future lessons.
Okay. An organism is blank when it has 2 identical alleles of a particular gene. Is it heterozygous, humongous, tautologous, or homozygous?
Heterozygous, humongous, tautologous, or homozygous? That surprised me. Math Dad changed the answers from what I thought they were going to be.
You know what a tautology is, Science Mom?
I actually do not off the top of my head.
Yeah, so it's like when you... Something is defined in terms of itself. It's a tautology. Like, yeah, that doesn't... Just self-evident, like...
There we go.
So tautologous. I don't know. It's a real word though. I looked it up. I don't know how to say it. Okay, we're seeing one category vying for the most votes. So.
But we have a runner-up that has quite a few votes as well.
So non-trivial number of votes here, and you are correct. Homozygous, so it means the same, so the identical allele. So that was like when we had capital letter matched with capital letter or lowercase letter matched with lowercase letter.
That's right. If the alleles are the same, it is homozygous.
Okay. What is the term for the observable traits or physical characteristics of an organism? Is it a daguerreotype, a phenotype, a karyotype, or a genotype?
And on page 21 of the notes, there is a little matching exercise. If you haven't done it yet, I hope you'll do it after class just to reinforce these new terms again. Make sure that you've got them down.
Oh, okay, this one's a little closer.
This one is a little closer. Come on, Kaladin, we need to cheer for him. You've got this.
Okay, not quite as close anymore.
Haha, see, it worked.
It's all due to Kaladin.
It is.
Well, they can't always have Kaladin with them when they take tests or when they go about life. So
They can think of Science Dog and it will help.
it's the main takeaway from this course. Need a puppy, Mom. Science mom said so.
Is it daguerreotype, phenotype, karyotype, or genotype? Which of these is the term for the observable traits or the physical characteristics that you see?
I'll give you a hint. It ends in type.
I think that was obvious, Math Dad.
Okay. Revealing the answer to be a
Phenotype.
So
Good job, everyone.
phenotype is what we're seeing, and the genotype is working behind the scenes, but we don't actually see that.
That's right.
Okay.
Last but not least,
All right. The term blank describes a trait that will be expressed when both alleles are identical, but will not be expressed when the alleles are heterozygous.
ooh,
So is this strongly weak? Is it recessive? Is it introverted or dominant? What do we call such a trait?
so when it's heterozygous, you do not see it. That's the clue. Is it recessive, dominant, introverted, or strongly weak? You can tell who wrote
weakly
these.
strong. I mean,
You can tell who wrote these answers. It wasn't me. It was this guy over
those
here.
are good terms, Science Mom.
They are. They're good. They're good. It's a good question. And it's a question that has a clear winning answer up here that is about to bump you in the head, Math Dad, which means that you are about to be defeated by the unbeatable science kids.
You're always counting your chickens before they hatch. So let's see how they did. And so it's recessive. So how did you know it was recessive, Science Mom?
Because in the heterozygous form, when you have one of each, another trait is being expressed, another trait is being dominant. So it's recessive.
So that's how you knew. All right, that was 5 for 5.
Good job, everyone.
Well done. Got a silly video you've earned. The male pufferfish spends days making elaborate circular patterns to attract a mate. The more impressive the circle, the more likely that the female will choose to mate. Tough crowd there.
Our kids were really worried that you would feel very bad for Math Dad because I took the dog. But don't worry, the dog's here. Math Dad still has a science puppy.
That's right.
I want to say real fast before we end, to be sure to, in Teachable, to be sure to go and do the week 2 quiz so that you can review the terms that we studied. And then we have a deep dive about why zebras aren't domesticated. So read that article, and then there are a couple questions to answer, and we really look forward to hearing your results.
We also want to remind you about the deep dive from last week where you were trying to clone some potatoes. We're hoping that you're getting started on that and that you have a plan in mind. And don't forget to water your plants once you've planted them.
And then a couple quick questions I wanted to answer real quick. A great one from William. What happens when someone has blonde hair, but both of their parents don't have blonde hair? And it turns out that with human genetics, such as eye color and hair color and skin color, things are so much more complicated than just 1 or 2 alleles or 1 or 2 genes. In fact, eye color is determined by more than, I believe, 11 different genes. There's a little comic about it in the notes. So it is possible for 2 blue-eyed parents to have a brown-eyed child and vice versa. And with hair color, things are more complicated than just 1 gene.
So another great question here from Silver Dragon asking, like, why is purple dominant and white recessive? Is there any obvious reason why that would be, Science Mom?
We will be getting into that in just a couple weeks. We will explain why that happens. And then last question from Nick Official, why would someone want dwarf plants? And it turns out with a lot of crops, dwarf plants are actually an advantage if you have a very small space. So if you have a big garden and lots of room, having tall pea plants is great. But if you want to grow a pea plant in a little pot, then having a dwarf variety that stays very short is a big advantage. So for most of our crops, we actually do have mutations that will give a short plant, and there are those varieties as well.
Well, I'm excited for next week when we get into Punnett squares. Science
Yes,
Mom.
next week we will be getting into Punnett squares and talking more about the laws of heredity.
Work hard, grow smart, and we'll see you next time.